So take us into this outline that we're going to get on the 13th. Exactly what are we looking for? What will be in it?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the starting point is a bad one. This administration inherits from Barack Obama a fiscal outlook that begins with large deficits, and within the 8 years of what they would hope would be the Trump presidency, those deficits will rise to $1 trillion. They'll be over 5% of GDP. And of that $1 trillion, about 60% of it is interest on previous borrowing. So you've got a situation where interest costs is going to be the second largest government program. Only Social Security will be bigger. That's not a very appealing starting point. And this is an administration that wants to display an aggressive growth rate, something that looks like 3% or greater. It's going to need policies that would justify that growth rate, a tax reform. And there's a tension there between the big tax cut that the president proposed on the campaign and the pledges of Speaker Ryan and Chairman Brady to have revenue-neutral tax reform. They want to have an infrastructure program. How big is that going to be? How fast will it hit? What will it cost taxpayers? And what will it look like on the defense spending front? There's been a pledge to increase the cap on defense spending. Sort of starting from a tough starting point and doing those things is going to be a real challenge.
Well, so you put it exactly the right way. How do you reconcile those two things? You say on the one hand, we've got a high deficit that's getting higher. On the other hand, there's a pro-growth agenda that's going to require money. How do you come up with the money to pay for that agenda?
Well, I think tax reform is the key. I'm very interested in seeing the details of what the White House is looking for in tax reform. The House has put together an aggressive blueprint that would make the United States the single place on the globe with one low tax at 20%. Be a great place to invest, to innovate, and to grow. Will the White House embrace that vision for business taxation? If so, it's the best route to getting a quick jump start and some sustained improved performance. They're doing the right thing on the regulatory front. I think quietly people have not really noticed that the executive orders on the regulatory front have really put the agencies on a budget. The Congress has been stripping out some of the midnight regulations and has actually passed out of the House two important reforms of how regulations get formulated in the U.S. So there are some of the pieces of the pro-growth package that people have been looking for already progressing. The question is, can they piece it together in a systemic way?
Right, and so cost cutting is one thing. Coming up with an extra $1 trillion or $500 billion is another. Do we need the border adjustment tax to get tax reform done? If we don't, is tax reform dead in the water?
I think the House proposal is a pivotal moment in tax reform. I think the notion of adjusting taxes at the border has been very poorly understood. This is a common practice in 160 countries around the globe. It hasn't interfered with trade. It won't interfere with trade. Its primary purpose in the tax proposal the House put out is to protect the integrity of the U.S. tax base, to keep companies from shifting profits offshore and then repatriating them tax-free. That's what they need to do.
Right, but Doug, President Trump himself has come out and said that it's confusing. He's not sure if he's for it or not. Sure. There's confusion in the administration versus the House plan. If we do not get the border tax adjustment through Senate and then through President Trump, what's the tax rate have to be? Is it now 25% versus 15%?
I think the key is the White House has to be very clear on what it wants to get tax reform done. You need great leadership on tax reform. Sadly, I think the focus on the border really is talking about one tree when we should be talking about the forest. The forest is getting the rate down. The forest is having investment incentives like expensing. It's the neutrality of debt and equity finance. That's what tax reform is about, and the focus has been on one little piece. That piece isn't essential. There are other ways to get there. You need to get a tax reform done, though. And so what will the White House say, and how forcefully will they put their political capital on the line to get it done?
Okay, so you know Washington well. The border adjustment tax is not going to get done unless the president really gets behind it 100%. When does he have to do that? Does he have to do that next Tuesday?
I think the White House is already behind the curve in saying what it wants in tax reform. Again, I don't think the border adjustment is the key. I think the notion of getting a dramatically improved corporate tax code is the key. Is that going to look like the campaign proposal of the president, which was a 15% rate, a worldwide base, and a corporation income tax? Or is it going to be a House cash flow tax with a territorial system?
Okay.
Those are really different, and the White House needs to say what it wants.